Welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. I'm your host, John O'Sullivan. Every week, we connect you with the top minds in the world of sports, coaching, leadership, and building championship programs so you can take your athletes and your teams to the next level. Welcome to the Way of Champions podcast, everybody. It's John. So excited to have you here this week. So excited to be joined this week by Ollie Gage to talk some good stuff about the Canadian Premier League and soccer. Now, Ollie Gage is the director of football at the Canadian Premier League, and this is a new professional league in Canada that has fit between its three MLS teams and its youth setup to try to make sure that there is an avenue for players who might get overlooked by Major League Soccer academies or too young to go overseas, and provide them a pathway to the top level of professional soccer in North America. So it's a really, really interesting concept, and that's why I wanted to talk to Ollie, because of his philosophy on a successful evidence-based approach to sport and player development. Now, his background, his father was actually a Premier League player with Aston Villa and Wimbledon, Sheffield United, and Ollie's path went from player to the performance side of things. He's previously head of performance at the University of Virginia in the United States, head of performance analysis and technical recruitment for the Houston Dynamo of Major League Soccer. And he joined the Premier League first as the head of on-field performance and recruitment in 2019 before becoming director of football. So he's one of the most forward-thinking sports people in North America because they have had to do things a little bit differently in the Canadian Premier League. They have a very different, innovative transfer policy. They've overhauled player recruitment. They've asked teams to sign foreign players out of a pool that's already been previously scouted rather than leaving it up to each individual team. And the league, in its short existence, has achieved many firsts, and we'll talk about those. So in our conversation today, Ollie and I talk about the league. We talk about player development. We talk about overlooking, or how not to overlook, the talent that whispers, and so much more. And how some players like Jonathan David and Tajon Buchanan, people who never went to MLS academies and yet they're top-level players, how can Canada, and how can really the world, not miss those type of players? And certainly for Canada getting ready to be the co-host of the 2026 World Cup, they can't allow any players to fall through the cracks, okay? So get ready for a fascinating conversation on how you build a new league and how you think ahead so that you don't just try the things that haven't worked for everyone else in the past. All right? Now, before we get started, I want to thank our two amazing podcast sponsors. First, our great friend Michelle at Good Sport. Go to goodsport.com for my favorite sport nutrition drink. I drink it after every single time I ride my bike. I bring a bottle of Good Sport, put it in my Hydro Flask, keep it cool. It's actually made from milk, but they take out the proteins, and what you get at the end is this delicious sports beverage that has way less sugar and more of the stuff that's good for you. So go to goodsport.com, check them out, order yourself a case. I know you'll like it like I love it. And also thanks to our friends at Sports Refund. Now, a lot of us, we're right in the middle of our kids' seasons right now, but what happens if they get injured? What happens if they get sick and they miss 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, 4 months, whatever it is? You're still paying those sports fees, even though your kids can't play. Well, with Sports Refund, just like trip insurance, if your kids can't participate, you don't have to play. You don't have to pay. I'm struggling with those two words today. You don't have to pay. Right? So it's a really interesting concept. If you go to sportsrefund.com/game, GAME, and in there you'll just type in your sport that your child plays and your fees for the year, and it'll show you the price, just pennies on the dollar, of what it would cost to insure their sports fees for the year. So it's a really cool concept. Its time has come as sports has gotten more and more expensive for our youth. So check it out for sure. Okay, sportsrefund.com. And then finally, this podcast is always supported by our incredible podcast champions. I just dumped a bunch of cool videos for them on Patreon for our Patreon champions. Some videos from our Way of Champions conference as a special thanks to all of them. And they get lots of stuff. They get a couple $100 of our online courses for free, and they get so much more. And we have a new podcast champion this week, David Purdom. David, thank you so much for supporting our podcast, for coming on and giving that small donation every month to help us put this out each week. So if you want to become a podcast champion, you want all that good stuff, go to Patreon, patreon.com/Way of Champions. Okay. All right, everyone, get ready. Ollie Gage is coming. We're going to talk Canadian Premier League and so much more. Enjoy. Ollie, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. So happy to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm always excited to jump on whenever I can and open up a little bit about my role here at the CPL and football in general. So I'm looking forward to it.
Brilliant, man. Well, I want to spend some time later talking about the league and sort of the ideas behind it, but maybe give our listeners just a little bit about your background, because you've been involved in the game your whole life with your dad as a top player, going into your involvement on the analytics and the coaching side and things like that. So maybe just talk about how you became director of football at the Canadian Premier League.
Yeah, it's been, as you mentioned, my dad was a Premier League footballer, so I'm in a very fortunate position. However, ironically, he's had next to nothing to do with my actual career in the game. Certainly, especially, he played for Sheffield United in the Premier League, and my first job in football was with Sheffield Wednesday, so he certainly wasn't the one that set that up for me. Yeah, so I came out to America, a very, very kind of common story. Failed academy player, was nothing special, never was going to make it. Looking back now, knowing what I know, I had no chance. I was never going to make it. So at 21, I came out to America on a scholarship, had my master's paid for me, which ironically was in organizational leadership and marketing, so nothing to do with football. And I returned home to England and got an internship at Sheffield Wednesday with the first team when they just got promoted from League One to the Championship. Very much the mandate was to survive in the Championship. I was clipping set pieces, clipping loan players for coaches to watch all their actions in games, like very much the grunt work side of things. Definitely wasn't having anything too much to do with success on the field, in my opinion. It was very much a foot in the door. And once I'd done that for 6 to 9 months, right at the back end of that first Championship season, I had a girlfriend from the USA that I met during my time out there, and she moved to England with me originally, and we decided that my life and my career would probably be in North America in the long term. So we moved out. I took a 6-month short-term coaching contract, taking 2 under-12 travel teams, like literally just nothing high level at all. Your kind of run-of-the-mill American coaching gig doing 12-year-old kids. But I was close to Washington, D.C., and a job came up at the University of Virginia. And it was technically it was called an operations assistant, but in reality, it was a performance analyst, using data, using video, all that type of stuff. I'd been doing some of it at Sheffield Wednesday. So I got the job, had an awful lot of success there in the 2 and a bit years I was there for. We won the national championship. They did a really good job of highlighting how different my role was to other people in similar positions, and that it was a performance-based role rather than administration. And Houston Dynamo and a couple of other MLS teams actually all approached me at a very similar time, asking to come and join them. So I eventually accepted the job at the Dynamo, spent 3.5 years there, moving from traditional first team analyst, analyzing the opposition, trying to figure out how to win games. I moved into recruitment and a lot more work using data with the GM on trying to find some undervalued players. And I hate to use the Moneyball cliche, but Moneyball in it a little bit. and again had some success there, which was great. And the CPL approached me at the back end of 2018, and I felt like it was an opportunity I just couldn't say no to. So it's been a really interesting, like very different, non-traditional route through the game, I would say, for most Englishmen that are working in professional sport in the US. But it's been like a great journey so far. So really happy.
And then it was just too hot in Houston, so you went all the way to Canada just to cool it down a little bit.
Yeah, well, I actually went to school in Erie, Pennsylvania, on the shores of Lake Erie. It's officially the snowiest city in the US.
Yeah.
So definitely used to the snowbanks and the brutal winters. But yeah, I got fed up of seeing palm trees and beautiful beaches and all the rest of it down in Houston. And I thought I'd put myself through a little bit more misery and risk frostbite. I think
a little more misery. Awesome. Well, it's such an interesting thing. Tell us just, I want to really set the foundation for what we're going to talk about. So maybe give people now an idea of the Canadian Premier League and what it's all about. Because I'll be honest, like before I crossed paths with you, I didn't know a ton about it. I'd heard about it. I heard about one of your teams beating Vancouver again recently, and so just to talk about the Canadian Premier League and what's the idea and the philosophy behind the league.
Yeah, so quite famously, Canada was named as the most underperforming national team in the world based on a few different factors in the book Soccernomics. You know, when you look at Canada, G7 nation, decent enough population, wealthy, infrastructure's there, great youth game. There really is not much there that's stopping Canada from being a lot better than they are nationally. And as you can see now, the wheels are starting to turn, things are starting to fall into place, and they're starting to climb the world rankings, and rightfully so. When you look at the landscape of professional football in Canada, you have 3 MLS teams that service a 30-odd million population. There was no level underneath that, for lack of a better word, even though we're counted as the tier 1 league in the country because the MLS teams count as a US, tier. The way I describe it to people back home is, imagine if Celtic and Rangers played in the English Premier League and there was no Scottish Premier League or no professional football in Scotland. We are here to fill that void, to give Canada their actual own professional tier 1 league that they can call their own, and definitely in the short term kind of fill that development, that hole in the development pathway where you see some very talented kids going to university, not quite being MLS level players and just fizzling out of the game. And, at the age of 23, 24, 25, they're working in an office or doing whatever it is that they're doing. And in another life, they could have been a professional footballer and getting a move to Europe or playing for Canada or whatever it is. So there was a need for this league for a long, long time. Canada didn't have their own professional league since the 80s. And with the World Cup coming and stuff like that, it was just time for this league. So.
And I think what's interesting is obviously the top league is super important, right? But even if you go, to England where you're from or whatever, I mean, how many of the players who just played for England in the Euros this summer cut their teeth in the Championship or League One or whatever? They go out on loan as young players at these critical ages, right? 17, 18, 19, 20, and get their games in. I mean, I got to think it's most of them, right?
Yeah, I think it was at least 20 of England's squad this time around at the Euros and even back in the World Cup. Being a Sheffield United fan myself, Harry Maguire, Kyle Walker, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, all played in the lower leagues of England for Sheffield United before moving on to Premier League clubs. And that's exactly what we are right now. I mean, there's a misconception from a lot of people that we're rivals with the MLS clubs in Canada and that we're competing with each other. And yeah, we play each other on the pitch every now and then in the Canadian Championship. And, teams in Toronto may, challenge some supporters for who's going to, who they're going to support, who they're going to buy tickets for. But in reality, this thing doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. If we succeed, it doesn't mean that we are taking away from the MLS clubs and vice versa. I think there's a world in which we not just coexist, but we help each other. And we're not stupid enough to think that Alphonso Davies or even Tejan Buchanan and some of these great Canadian players are going to be playing in the CPL at 16 and then also staying in the CPL through the age of 24 and being a world star. Like we know what we are, but there's definitely a world in which they can cut their teeth in our league before moving on to something bigger and better. Definitely in the short term, and then long term, talking 10, 15 years out, who knows what it looks like. But for now, that's the gap we fill.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned Tejan Buchanan, Davies, Jonathan David. I mean, I think they're ones, certainly Buchanan and Jonathan David, they were never identified by MLS academies, right? They were just club players at other clubs that then made the jump, right, to MLS and then eventually to Europe here. Alphonso Davies also at 14, right? So it's like you can't have 3 clubs identifying all the future pros in a country, like you said, of 30 million people.
Yeah, it's I know you've had Rasmus Ankerson on, and I've read majority of his books, and I've actually most recent one I read was The Goldmine. And
Goldmine Effect, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a lack of talent in this country that's the issue. It's the lack of talent identification and opportunity, and it's an impossible task really for Vancouver or Toronto to cover the whole of such a vast region. So it's about setting up a system in which the most talented players get spotted rather than developing them yourself or anything like that. So especially when you look at the case, I mean, I don't know if they identified Jonathan David or not, but I think he's very famously kind of came out and said he had no intention of ever playing for an MLS academy. And the moment he turned 18, he left for Europe. So he's a little bit of a different one. But Tejan Buchanan, for example, I don't know if he was on their radar, on Toronto's radar. He played for a huge youth club in the Greater Toronto area. But maybe he just needed a chance to play in college. Maybe he just needed that. Maybe at 16, 17, he wasn't the player that we see now. It's a tale as old as time that players just need some minutes and they need a development opportunity. And it's not always as easy, in my opinion, to say, well, this kid's a superstar at 23 and he was right under your nose. Like, how didn't you find him? Like, they might have, and he might not have quite been what they needed at the time. There's a million different factors that go into player development. And, Jamie Vardy got missed, and he's, how much is he worth, or how much has he been worth in his career? All these players that played in the lower leagues that Premier League clubs in theory should have spotted. It's just not that simple. Sometimes you're at a huge academy and you get released. And then you go and, again, to use a Sheffield United example, David Brooks at Bournemouth was at Man City's academy, got released, and Sheffield United picked him up, and he tore up League One and then moved to Bournemouth in the Premier League. And you're thinking, how's this Premier League player been overlooked by the club that he's even at? But sometimes you need to be released to get that kind of kick and that kind of almost bringing you back to reality and to light a fire under you. So you look at Jamie Vardy example, he was at Sheffield Wednesday's academy. And everyone's saying, oh my God, look at what they let go. But he might have needed to be let go to become the Jamie Vardy we all know today. So it's not always as easy as, this talented kid was 20 miles away from your club and you missed him. Like, I don't always buy into that.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that. And because of this, especially with male players, how they mature, how they grow, right? Gareth Bale almost got released at 16 by Southampton, right? Because he was going through a growth spurt and he was struggling. And I think he was the 7th fastest guy on the team at that time, and it's like, and it was a really close vote, it was like a 4-3 vote to scholarship him and keep him. And a year and a half later, he's in the first team. And so I think these type of stories are really, really critical, that there is a place for those players to develop. And I think, Rasmus and I talked a lot about this idea of getting released, and certainly Brentford they scrapped all their youth teams, right? And now they just have their under 23s and their first team, because they're pulling these kids, like you said. Like I think it was just, did you say David Brooks? Was that the name, who got released, right? And all of a sudden now has a chip on his shoulder, right? And we can take that player who has a chip on his shoulder and has some ability, and now we have him at 18, you know, in 1 or 2 years that investment could pay off for us, not 9 or 10 years where we're going to get it wrong 98% of the time.
Yeah, the BT model is becoming much more prevalent. A lot of clubs in the UK are starting to look very seriously. I think they're at least 7 or 8 now that have developed kind of the B team, or rebranded it from the under 23s to the B team. And I think in years to come, we will see the BT model be maybe not standard practice, but much more common. Certainly for a club like Brentford, I know, they're fighting with not just Arsenal and Chelsea and Fulham and these clubs, but also QPR and other clubs in London. So they're scrapping over all this young talent, spending money not just on coaching them for free, but recruiting them and infrastructure and all the things that come with running an academy. And when you're losing your best players from that academy and you're getting a relatively small check because of training compensation and all the rest of it, like, I think they just looked at the whole thing and thought, like, what are we doing here? We're spending millions and millions, we're losing our best players anyway. Like, why don't we invest that in the first team and just adopt the B team model? And I think it's a perfect example of how Rasmus just kind of very objectively looks at a problem and doesn't care about the perception of the solution. It's just the right thing to do. And I think you could do a lot more of that in football.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it was fascinating how he even said, and it's not just London teams. I mean, you have a really good player, it's Manchester teams, it's wherever is going after your players. And he just said anyone that we identified as a potential future first teamer was identified by everyone else as well, who could offer him more money, more this, more that. I think the other piece that's really important is this idea of like what's in your windshield. So for your teams in your league to sign a young player who gets his chance and then jumps to MLS or jumps to Europe, the 16-year-old goes, I was just playing with that guy last year, right? And now there he is in Europe, or there he is, with Toronto or wherever he goes. That's a huge thing as well, isn't it? Because now that makes the pipeline feel much, much more doable. I trained with that guy for 2 years. I played with him. I know I can get there too, correct?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's all about having heroes, or whatever you want to call it. And we're not talking about a 16-year-old kid looking at Cristiano Ronaldo and saying, I could be him, which of course you can. But it's about maybe the next step up the ladder. We have Joel Waterman playing for Montreal Impact, and you've got 15, 20 players in this league that played with him while he was at Cavalry FC, so they see him as, their North Star right now. My next step is to MLS. Or Tristan Borges, who's back on loan here, but player of the year for us in 2019 and got his move to Europe. And you have 20 odd players on that team saying, my teammate, I was literally tackling this guy in training, and now he's playing in Europe, living the dream. It can be me. Time to get my head down. Not that they're not getting their head down, but what's he doing differently? How did he make it? Can I be doing anything different? What's the 1% he's got that I don't have? And these are all hugely important factors in talent development.
Yeah. Now, you one of the really interesting things I think you've done in the league is this idea of, I think, a minimum number of Canadian players and then minimum minutes for younger players as well. So talk about that, because I think this is a huge part. This is a commitment to youth that is forced upon teams by the league, not hoped for by, oh, well, we really need to do this for Canada, but no, I want to win. It's like, no, you have to win within these parameters. So we change the structure and say you really have to pour into these players, because if your kids have to play this many minutes, then you better get them ready versus just signing some foreign guy.
Yeah, and right now we're not reevaluating the balance of that. We're certainly not considering whether it's worth doing because we think it's been an enormous success. I think you have to look at ensuring players get enough minutes while not wrapping them in cotton wool and protecting them by knowing that they have to play.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to actually raise the number of minutes that is. It started off at 1,000. We pushed to 1,500. We're looking at a new
And
number.
that's over how many games?
28 game season.
28 games, yeah.
So, and that's between as many under 21s as you want, right? So you can kind of really heavily invest in one stud or two, or you can kind of piecemeal it with five. But we look at it and you're like, we can't make it 5, 6, 7,000, certainly not now, because then you have guys knowing that they have to play and they have to be signed, and it's a soft landing spot for them. But you want to make it enough minutes that players develop, and they're important numbers in this team, and coaches have to pay attention to them. So it's about finding that balancing point of opportunity versus like risk almost on the players' side. But it's certainly a core aspect of the team, of the league, sorry, and what we want our teams to do. And I think as a coach, you can have certain parameters are forced upon you, and as long as they're the same for every team in the league, it's not like anyone's at a disadvantage here. Like, it's not like you're asking one team to play younger players more than the others. So if you're winning games or losing games, it's on the same rule set as everybody else. So what are we talking about here? I think we all agree that playing young players in a league where, first of all, it's brand new. Second of all, you're not getting relegated. We already know, we've discussed what this league is in the Canadian soccer landscape. So in my mind, there's not that much of a discussion. Now, when we start playing MLS clubs and, Forge have represented us 2 years in a row on the CONCACAF stage, it's a little bit different, and we can't hamper them too much. I can't kind of handcuff them when we're trying to win games internationally. But certainly I think there's a balancing point there, and we're trying to, it's all about trying to find what that number is.
Yeah, and I think you bring up such an interesting point of, I like this idea, the phrase used, the soft landing. If you guarantee too many minutes, then it's like, well, who cares if I'm ready because I have to play, which is not preparing a player for the next level. And if you don't guarantee any, then the manager is under no, thing to play them. But if you have a league where, hey, we have to do this, then I think it really makes for a situation where everyone's under those same things. I mean, I've been to Belgium, I've been to Spain, and one of the things that they do in youth development, with the kids, like in Belgium, for instance, they play quarters, they don't play halves, right? And any kid who doesn't play the first quarter has to play the second quarter, and they don't make subs. So every kid is guaranteed half a game. Now, as a coach, right? And these are younger kids, these are 10, 11, 12, right? But as a coach, I have to invest in, we're playing AV8, all 12 kids or all 14 kids, because they all have to play, not, oh, well, I'm not going to play this kid that day. And so now you're the next level up. This is a professional environment. You have to fight for your minutes. You have to be there. But if we all have to find the minutes to get kids in the game, it's, it makes us invest in those kids more. And really, that's the business model too, because those are the kids that we can sell on, to the next level club and invest back into our own club. Correct?
Yeah. Certainly. Obviously, there's a business aspect to it, but I don't think that was even considered or had very little influence in the decision when we were building the league in 2018 in the league rules. I think it was more this philosophical idea of playing young Canadians. We're definitely playing in the 2026 World Cup, and right now it looks like we're heading towards playing in the 2022 World Cup, or at least we're in with a really good chance. The team doing great. So, yes, there's a business aspect to it. These guys are the obvious targets to be sold externally, but we're not really dealing with like league changing amounts of money when we are selling these players just yet because of the level. So we do understand that playing them helps, but I don't think any of us think we're going to get $10 million for one of our players in the next 10 years, 5 years, whatever. But it's also important to think about how we mandated it. So we talked about this soft landing spot. First of all, you have to protect the clubs from themselves a little bit, and that's not to disrespect clubs or coaches, but Man United make bad decisions. Chelsea make bad decisions. Real Madrid and Barcelona have made some really bad decisions recently. So if you just said, we want you to play 1,500 minutes in young Canadians, what happens if a team signs one, puts all their eggs in one basket, and he gets a season-ending injury and they can't fulfill their minutes? So we mandated that it was 3. First of all, at least 3 players under contract that are under 21 Canadian. First of all, to protect clubs from an instance like that. But second of all, for this kid who does, in theory, have a soft landing spot and knows he has to play, it's important there's 2 others at least that are waiting in the wings, pushing him. And he knows, if I'm not doing the business, there's 2 other guys that qualify for these minutes too, that are challenging me for my spot anytime. So again, not just looking at the total number of minutes, but the total number of mandated young Canadians that we have across the league, and what's the right fit or what's the right balance for player development while also ensuring the quality of play on the field.
Yeah. Do you as a league provide resources, or is it left up to the club to help those players with that transition from youth ranks to the pro ranks, right? Playing against men instead of playing against kids their own age or whatever. And I'm not just talking about, we always pay attention to the physical transition and because we have all that sports science data, but what about the mental transition of getting in on a tackle with that guy, maybe some guy that I did watched in MLS or in Europe who's now back in this league? Like, is that a comfortable thing for a 15-year-old to do?
Yeah, it's certainly something that we see the value in. Right now, we don't provide a league-wide, for example, sports psychology or sports science resource. We want to, with an unlimited amount of money, it's something
you do a lot of things.
Yeah, of course, especially with what's happened in the world the last.
They could even plant palm trees for you at your house.
Yeah, exactly. They could find a way to make it look like Houston in my back garden. But seriously, we see the value in it. Again, looking at this kind of how much discomfort is good for player development versus a hindrance. You want them to feel the pain a little bit, but not so much that it deflates their confidence and makes them fall out of love with the game, or feel like they can't make it at this level. So finding the right fit of allowing the clubs to be the clubs and trusting the coaches to develop these guys the right way. We have to kind of find that balance. We help them recruit them. We certainly have a database of what we think are the best youngsters in Canada. Clubs can access that anytime. We've put on a couple of combines and showcase games of the best on best, as it were, and a few players have been signed from that, very successfully so as well. So we do as much as we can to make sure our eyes are on the right players, in our opinion. But once they're with the clubs, we're at the point where we trust the coaches. A lot of them have come from the youth game in Canada. They're some of the best youth coaches available at the time when they all got hired to be the head coaches of our clubs. So again, I feel like I'm saying a lot, but it's all about finding that right balance between how involved we are versus allowing the clubs to be the clubs.
Yeah. Talking about recruitment, I know from scouting, and I don't know if this is something's changing as well, because obviously COVID affected every league everywhere in the world, including you guys. But from a scouting perspective, your league does some central scouting, and clubs have to sign some players out of that pool. So I was reading an article in The Athletic interviewing you, and it was talking about how sometimes we're, rather than all these new clubs trying to set up a scouting department, if we can do this centrally and identify a pool of players that they can sign, that helps the league. How has that gone over?
As you can imagine, there was definitely some growing pains when the project was first launched, especially with the clubs, with the coaches at the clubs. The owners were on board 100%, as were a lot of the presidential type characters at clubs. But as you can imagine, the coaches, there was a little bit of a friction there, a culture clash there. I do not for 1 second blame them for that. I totally understand. I've worked at clubs myself, but the reality is we're working at a level where they can't afford, for the most part, advanced data analytics. We don't have full-time professional scouts that are based in other countries or whatever. A lot of the players that were signed in our first year were a little older than we'd like them to be, a little more expensive, maybe, didn't really have the impact that you thought they may have, as like a marquee player in this league.
Yeah.
And when you looked at it's not exactly the most scientific method in the world, but when you look at the league best 11 and things that are voted for by fans and by fellow coaches and stuff, it was the Canadians that were delivering in this league. We sold 5 players, almost all of them were young and all of them were Canadian. So when you looked at the football in this league, there was an obvious area in which we could very quickly improve the level of play, and it was the international recruitment. So we decided to centralize that and create some mandates. And just for the record, they don't have to sign them from this pool. We provide the pool as a resource, but if they go and find their own young players that would qualify for the pool, we use data a lot to kind of evaluate them and justify how the level they're playing at, and all the rest of it. If clubs go and find their own players that would fit in this pool, we absolutely accept them. But we also proactively go and approach these players, figure out a lot of the finances, like get them 95% of the way there, and then present them to the clubs and say,
right, like yes, I will go to Canada. I would be interested in this.
The shopping list, I'll come. Really interested. Here's roughly my salary, and then you leave the clubs to negotiate that final little piece. How many years is the deal? Is it 2, 3, 5, 10 grand more than what the league office has arranged? But generally speaking, we get the deal an awful lot of the way there, and we know that all of these players coming in are ones that, not every player always works out. Like I said before, the best clubs in the world miss on transfers, but we know that we're comfortable with the process of recruiting them. And if you look right now, there's, one of the players that came through this program is the leading scorer in the league. He's got 11. The next closest player is on 7. So there's signs of life in it. I think we need to evolve it a little bit. You never want to stand still. We've got 2 years of learning now, and we know what works and what doesn't, and we're a bit smarter than we were. But I think there's signs here that the theory is that it's working. And if nothing else, we've got other leagues and other clubs from around the world approaching us, asking how we did it and why we did it and how it all works. And if that's not a sign that something's going right, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think it's great. And I think the other piece is, you mentioned before that there is no relegation. And I think, that's something that a lot of people criticize Major League Soccer for. But I look at it, right, as someone who was playing here. I graduated university playing in 1994. So right after I graduated, we hosted the World Cup. The game grows. 2 years later, MLS starts. I was playing in the USISL at the time. My team was outdrawing some of the MLS teams, right? So it was a really different sort of environment. But what we have an example of, the investment in Major League Soccer teams, because you can't get relegated. We have these beautiful stadiums and this investment in facilities and youth that if there was relegation, right, why would you build a stadium if you could be out of the league next year? And so I think there's something, there's a lot of purists who say it ruins the league, but I think the league's a better league because of the stadiums and the investment in players than, you're out of division a year later.
Yeah, it's I met with at one of the games, I was approached by one of the supporters groups in the league, and we just we stood and chatted for 20 minutes, half hour, and this idea of pro rel in the long term for the CPL came up, and what are my thoughts in general about pro rel, and their opinion, and I think a lot of people's opinion is that it's the it's the anvil around the neck of American soccer and Canadian soccer that with promotion and relegation, everything would change, and all of a sudden all the stakes are raised and player development gets massively improved. And, it's such a tough subject because you're absolutely right in that, it is important for the clubs at the bottom of the table to feel the pain and to not just kind of tank so they get the first round draft pick and all the rest of it. But I don't necessarily agree that promotion relegation changes too much. Like for every, Brentford or Bournemouth or Sheffield United, there's also a Sheffield Wednesday or a Bolton Wanderers or an AFC Wimbledon who, their clubs get AFC Wimbledon's a bit different, but their clubs get ripped apart on chasing the promotion dream. So you have to be really, really careful with how that works. And I think when you look at MLS and hopefully the CPL in years to come, I don't think they could have got to where they are now with promotion and relegation in place. And
yeah, no,
you have to be really, really careful about kind of chasing purism and cutting your nose off to spite your face on this thing. Like in a perfect world, like yes, you can have sustainable clubs that can chase promotion and be relegated and everyone survives and you feel the pain for a couple of years if you do get relegated. But but look at what football clubs are, especially in Europe. You look how fragile the football pyramid has been with the financial realities of COVID. Clubs left, right, and centre up for sale. There's bankruptcy all over the place. Players aren't getting paid, and an awful lot of it can be pointed towards chasing promotion and trying to avoid relegation. So, getting a little bit philosophical now, but no, what is a football club?
Yeah,
so a lot of people, it's my local club, it's my community. So, ask people in Bolton or Sunderland or wherever in England, like, are you glad you chase promotion? And look at your club now. And I think a lot of clubs are starting to realize that, fan ownership and sustainability and being a club at the core of your local town, your community, even if that means you're maybe one division lower than you'd like to be. And every now and then you have a good run, but the club is safe and it provides a great place for your local community, a fulcrum of that. I think people are starting to reevaluate what a football club is for the most part. You're always going to have your Man Uniteds and Bayern Munichs and your super clubs, but in the real grassroots of the game, the real nitty gritty, I think people are starting to realize that maybe getting promoted isn't the be all and end all, and having a club you can be proud of that's very well connected to your community is also really important.
Yeah, and I mean, and Man United was formed in 1885 or something like that, right? And when they started, I think they were railroad workers who used to play in a league against other railroad workers, right? And Arsenal was people who worked in the armaments factory. And like so to say, well, we have promotion and relegation, it ignores, like you said, 100 years of history and attachment of a community to a club that doesn't exist with a brand new league or a brand new team or things like that. And then I just think, again, you won't get the investment to create a top level league or program without some sort of security. And yeah, maybe in an ideal world, and we're not even touching on, for every young player who makes it through, how many are mentally and emotionally and physically destroyed and lost. I mean, the English academy system has not been good for a lot of kids, far more than the ones it's been good for.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And even when you look at the more business side of it, in MLS, there's the collective bargaining agreement. Like, what happens to the players on the relegated clubs, their minimum salaries, or their guaranteed contracts? Like, the only way I can see it being done is if the one entity owns the whole pyramid, and you can get promoted and relegated within that. And there's a ton of assurances for the players, and the money would have to filter down significantly more than it currently does from the top to the bottom. There would have to be, you talk about parachute payments, you would need that times 10, in terms of the amount of money that gets sucked from the top division and kind of injected into the lower leagues. And who knows, it might happen. That might be the model that's adapted moving forward as people reevaluate this. And maybe the whole English system is bought by Amazon or whoever, yeah, someone that can afford to buy it, but for right now, I think, yeah, in an ideal world, we love the romance of promotion and relegation and what it means. I totally get it. I come from English football. I come from a club that's been up and down loads over the last few years. So I've experienced it, but it's not as easy as people think. And I don't think it's as black and white as everyone, not everyone, that's wrong, as a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And what we don't see in the dark, to the, like you said, to those players, or to those young kids who are cast aside by that system, is incredibly damaging. One of the things that I loved, and I was reading the article in the Athletic, that you guys, and maybe it was you or just in your league office, you had a list up on the wall of like things we want to accomplish as a league, and you've ticked a bunch of those boxes already. So can you talk about some of the accomplishments in just this short while, including, you know, I guess half your existence has basically been in the pandemic almost.
Yeah. So think of starting a league from scratch. Like, doesn't have to be in Canada or anywhere. How are you going to evaluate what success looks like on the field? You only, for the most part, you only play each other. So other than the naked eye, and we do some data things that try and evaluate the level of play, but other than the naked eye, how can you tell that the league is succeeding? Like, what are we trying to do here? So there's some very tangible benchmarks I think you could point towards and say, this is success. So we play against MLS clubs domestically. So when are we going to beat one? Is that a sign of health of the league? Like, yes. International transfer market. When are we going to buy a player? When are we going to sell a player? Again, very realistic and tangible, measurable objectives there. The national team. When are we going to have a player playing for the national team? So these sorts of things that you could point towards, okay, here's a very black and white incident that is measurable, like a smart goal almost, specific, measurable, obtainable, all the rest. And when you look at it, we sold 5 players, we bought a player, we beat an MLS club, we had a player playing for the national team. So a ton of those boxes we ticked in year 1, and we continue to tick to this day. But I don't think anyone realistically thought that we would be ticking them so quickly. So, like I said, when I thought the Canadians over delivered or delivered on the field, and don't get me wrong, some of the internationals did too, right? I mean, it's not like everyone was a bust. The leading scorer in the league was an international. But I think, and you look at football as a whole across the league, I don't think anyone in their wildest dreams thought we would achieve all of those things in the first year. And, you said at the start of the show, we just beat Vancouver again. Unfortunately for them, it's those guys that have been beaten twice now out of 2. But again, we beat them this year. One of our teams beat them. So are we MLS level? Like, no, of course not. We're not trying to, for a second, say we are. But I think we're a lot closer than people thought we would be 3 years into this thing.
Yeah. So what's the next? I mean, one thing about ticking off your boxes is you got to add a few more. What's the next level of how are we being successful? How are we defining success?
Yeah,
I mean, that's secret proprietary material.
Yeah, it's top secret. It's written in black light. You have to have a special bulb to see it on my wall. But no, I mean, we beat an MLS club. We've beaten one club out of 3, 2 years in a row now, or 3 years. We didn't play the Canadian Championship last year, so so we've beaten an MLS club. When are we going to beat 2 in any one season? When are we going to win the Canadian Championship? Maybe that's an objective. We play internationally in the CONCACAF Champions League, so what does success look like there? Maybe we can start measuring that. We sold a player, like, great. When are we going to sell a player for more than X amount of dollars, to show an improvement? It would be hard to say an improvement with how the world transfer market's been decimated from COVID, but there's all these things that you can kind of go again. When is not just a player from the CPL going to play for the national team? When is a player who signed in the CPL as an 18-year-old going to play 50 games and then be a national team regular? Like, when are we going to produce a star and really produce one, not just sign one for a year and he's on a good run of form, so he makes an appearance from the bench, but when is Tejan Buchanan going to come from the CPL? These are things that we're now kind of reloading, going again, and kind of doubling down and saying, okay, this is phase 2 or phase 3 of this thing.
It's such a great, ambitious project, and certainly with the 2026 World Cup coming up, I think you have that in your, looking forward to the future of, can we create this solid foundation? Because without a doubt, that World Cup is going to give the sport a bounce in Canada. Let's just call it a bounce in North America, right? Because it gave it a bounce in 1994. Even the Women's World Cup gave it a bounce in 1999. And the game is so much bigger and brighter and more public today, right? In 1994, you couldn't really get on TV and watch a game. You could watch soccer made in Germany on Saturdays, right? And that was it. And so now you have so many more fans, so many more educated people, so many more people who grew up with the game to now host a World Cup and then have a local team to go support is a pretty cool thing. And, we're even seeing it in the United States with, I think the league is NISA, right? And teams drawing thousands of fans a game and great support and building club networks underneath themselves because people just love the game and they want to see the highest level they can in their community.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to someone that played at college, and I played in the NPSL. Went to Detroit City and won, in front of like 4,000 or 5,000 fans.
Yeah, I was thinking of Detroit City as well because I know those guys. Yeah,
I got booked. Someone threw a beer at me when I was taking a throw in. I was a fullback. Someone threw a beer at me. It hit me on the shoulder. I picked it up and drank it, and the ref booked me. That is, when we talk about the nitty gritty and the grassroots of the game. I mean, Detroit City and those types of clubs are, the World Cup comes and everyone's watching it on TV, and someone from Detroit wants to go watch a game. There's not just a small club on their back garden now. There's a club that's drawing 5,000 and 6,000 fans, and it's an incredible atmosphere. And things are changing. So
yeah.
Again, hopefully in Canada, it's going to be just the same. Someone watches a World Cup game in Edmonton or wherever, and great, let's go down and see FC Edmonton playing next weekend, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, it's a wonderful project that you're working on. And I think what's, obviously as an American fan, I want to see the US go to the World Cup, but I think soccer and CONCACAF is better when everyone's better and when everyone's investing in the game. And certainly our league is more exciting when there's great Canadian players and great American players and great international players. And I think what you're doing is fantastic, and it is definitely the future, and has shown that it can be a great model in just a few short years. So any final thoughts, Ollie? Anything that you want to leave the people with, or ways that they can kind of connect with the league and watch games and see what's happening? Because it was cool when I read the Athletic article, how many people commented and said, yes, someone's talking about my local team here and everything. There is this fandom out there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, first of all, we have, if you do want to watch a game, we have an online streaming platform called One Soccer. It's not geo-blocked, so I was watching games from England. You can watch a game from Houston or California or Iowa or wherever, which is great. So if you do want to watch a game, all the national team games on there. We have I think there's some German, some Chinese Super League. It's a ton of content. So that's an obvious one right there. But our kits are really nice. They're bespoke, made by Macron. They're not cookie cutter, one size fits all, just a different color Adidas stripe or Nike swoosh or whatever. They're all like really cool. So any way you want to get involved, we need more eyes on the game here. So it's going to be a really interesting few years. And like you said, a strong Canada is a strong CONCACAF. And when you think about the best games or the really big experiences you have as a fan, as someone involved in the game, it's not about winning every game or winning the easy games. It's winning the hard games that make you fall in love with the sport. So the US playing, whoever it is, someone in CONCACAF and winning 12-0, an Apache stream is great, but the US beating Mexico is what people want, right? And the US playing Canada and players who legitimately dislike each other and have pride in the nation. And it's a real, not to say a fight as in the quality of play, but games mean more when there's a lot on the line. So US versus Canada means a lot more when Canada is just as good as the US, and anyone could win this thing, which is what you've seen over the last couple of years. It's not that much fun logging in to watch a game when it's pretty much going to be a blowout. Like you log in when there's a lot on the line, and that's when it means a lot to you. So
yeah, 100%, man. I think it's great. I mean, just watching the first round of qualifiers here these last week, and there's so much more attention on it, so much more excitement, and I think that excitement only trickles down to every community level, and the more communities that have a level for people to aspire to, the more children will pick this sport other than others. So Ollie, thanks so much for being on the Way of Champions, and best of luck with your project, and hopefully the world settles down and gets a little easier to run a league and run some competitions in, and you don't have to have too many more island bubbles in your future.
Yeah, being locked inside a hotel for a number of weeks consecutively, I've done it more times than I want to in my lifetime. So glad to see the back of that, hopefully.
Amen to that, man. Thanks for being on the Way of Champions.
No problem. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you all for listening. Thanks again, Ollie. Again, you can go to onesoccer.com to subscribe and watch some of those Canadian Premier League games. You can find all Ollie's contact info there and everything like that. And just a really cool concept. So thanks for being on. Thanks again to Sports Refund. Thanks again to Good Sport. And thanks again to David Purdom and all of our podcast champions for your support of this. Remember, everyone, your influence is never, ever neutral. Never, never, never. And the more aware of your influence you are, the more powerful it is. So go out there and make a difference this week. Look a kid in the eye. Change her life. Change his life. Invest. We'll see you again next week.